Hello, everybody. This is Jack White. We are at the Gatehouse Museum in Sykesville, Maryland for our second Porch Talk this summer. Here with me is Sid Starliper, and we're going to be talking about this book, In Search of Helen from Tulloch's, which is about Sid's mom, Sid's sister, Sid's whole family, and about Sid. Sid's mom, Sid's mother, Helen Small, became Helen Starliper. She died right up the road there in Springfield in 1952 of a very rare disease that still exists today. They didn't know what the disease was. Sid's sister died of the same disease in 2006. And that's how we were able to figure out what really happened to Helen. They've come a long way in understanding what this disease is and what causes it. There's quite a few stories here, but we're going to talk about Helen's life. Then we're going to talk about Sid's search later in his life, in his 70s, to find out what happened to Helen. So I'm going to be asking Sid questions. It's going to be an interview. And if you're watching this out on YouTube, hello. My dad's probably watching in Philly. Hi, Dad. All right. So this is a little sort of theme statement at the beginning of the book. I got this, I was learning about genetics, and I read this in a National Geographic article. Sometimes, deep in the nucleus of cells, a malformed monster lurks, a biological mutant that can sit dormant for years before rising from its slumber. When, and if it does, the monster can wreak havoc. Now, I'm just going to read a little bit of the beginning of the story, and then I'm going to start asking Sid questions. So when Helen showed up over at Springfield, they brought her in through the Hubner building, which is the police academy training place now. And at the time, it was the input place where they decided where they would send you. She spent a long time there, maybe 2 years, maybe less. Then they moved her to another building called they moved her to Colony 5 in the epileptic colony, Building 5 and Cottage 5 in the epileptic colony, which was an area set aside for epileptics. But by this time, 1950 or so, 51, they weren't using it just for that. They put her there for what they called custodial care, which meant they weren't trying to cure her. They couldn't cure her. They were just going to feed her and keep her alive. And chapter 1 starts right there. And I'm just going to read this little part. When the fever hit, Helen had been in Cottage 5 nearly a year, mostly in bed, watched over by nurses who worked 12-hour shifts for little pay. The nurses dreaded losing a patient and knew they were in danger of losing Helen. Her pulse was erratic. She gasped for air. She arched her neck and grimaced whenever anyone moved her arms or head. At midnight on October 4th, with her temperature at 104 and her heart beating 96 times a minute, Helen smiled at the nurse taking care of her. The nurse wrote it down. And then, at 8 a.m., with the fever down to 103, her color better, and her heartbeat at 104, the nurse wrote the following in the upper right margin of the paper where she reported Helen's progress. Patient was able to talk. That's all. 5 words scribbled 70 years ago, but so frustrating, so intriguing, and maybe something like a small miracle, because Helen couldn't talk. So, when this was happening, Sid, where were you?
Well, that would have been
52. 52.
Mom passed away October 6, 1952. So I was just 9 years old. 9 years old. So I was at home, living with my brothers and sisters, and with our grandmother, and that's where we were living at that time. So that's where we were at when that happened. We didn't have any knowledge of that. I didn't know anything about it. The hospital did call and left a message with my big sister that our mother was critical. For whatever reason, I don't know why. I wished I did know the reason why. Somebody didn't go to be with her when she passed away. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and so she was all by herself on October the 6th when she died.
Do you remember the day she left?
A little bit. Yes, I can remember a little bit. But what happened, that was July 24th, 1950. I have to speculate a little bit because all of us, it was a school. I mean, we were home from school. And it was a summer day, obviously. And we were all asleep. And our grandmother was not going to let anybody see or witness the deputy sheriff coming to our house.
So what happened was Helen was committed to Springfield. And when we were committed in those days, the sheriff took you to the hospital. And Sid was living with his grandmother, and who were you living with?
Well, most of my dad's brothers and sisters, I think there was, at that point, there was 12 of us living in an 8-room house with just 3 bedrooms. So, but it was okay. Our grandmother took very good care of us. So anyhow, that morning, early that morning, our grandmother walked my mother down to the old barn, excuse me, that was in the back of her house, and that's where the deputy sheriff was at. He was there waiting to transport our mother to Springfield. So that they did that. So our grandmother did that before daylight, so none of the neighbors could see. She didn't want anybody, thank goodness, and she didn't want us to see, and she didn't want the neighbors to see our mother being put in a deputy sheriff's car.
And this, by the way, was in Clear Spring, Maryland, which is a very small town. What, 300 people?
300, yes.
In fact, it's just one street, isn't it, with a couple?
Well, there's a couple of streets, but it's very small.
And your mom couldn't even really walk at that time.
No, she could not. From what I've learned, she couldn't walk. She could barely speak at that point. So my dad's sister actually helped our grandmother walk her down to the barn to put her in that car. But it was a very sad day. And just to put it all in perspective, think about this. 3 months after that, our mother's sister, Aunt Nan, who lives in Washington, D.C., came and took her to Washington, D.C. to try to get her some help on that, right after that. So it was bad. Our mother was really sick when she went to the hospital.
How did you find out that she died?
Wow, that's a good question. A bit difficult question for me, but my brother Bob and I, we worked at the local orchard in Clear Spring, and it was called Cohill Orchard. So, and I told Jack many a time, I think about, I was 7 years old. Bob was 9. And after school, we would go work at the orchard. And just to put it on fact, Kamar is how old? So I was able to pick up a bushel of apples because we had to put it on the conveyor belt to be separated. So anyhow, my brother Bob was such a good brother. So anyhow, we finished work and it was dark and we walked. I remember walking across the stream and we used the rocks so we wouldn't get our feet wet. So we walked on home, and I recently asked Bob, I said, Bob, I have to ask you a question. And this is just within the past 6 months. And I said, Bob, I was really afraid when we walked home at night. And I said, Bob, I'm so glad that you were there to protect me. And he looked at me and said, Sid, I was afraid too. So we walked home, got home to our house in Clear Spring, and Bob walked somewhere into the other room. From when I walked in the front door, my dad's sister was waiting on me. And she took me by the hand and she led me into the parlor. And she said, Sydney, she called me Sydney. She said, I have to tell you, your mother passed away today. I'll never forget that, never forget it. So it was tough, being that young and to be told that your mother had died.
And you had not seen her the whole time she was gone. Your dad never took you to visit. He never took any of you to visit. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. Mom was actually there 26 months. I think I did the math, and I think she was there 780 days. And I tell the story, often wonder, what was it like for her? 780 days, she waited for her children to show up. It never happened. We, for whatever reason, our father did not take us to see our mother. And so, and I can't explain why that, but anyhow, that's how it was. And so, very sad day.
I'll give you a little break. When she came in, they didn't know what was wrong with her. The doctor who checked her in was Dr. Sonnenfeld. I've got pictures of him. Very little guy, looks like a little elf. And he describes her condition. He described her as, when she tried to talk, as a mute trying to vocalize. She could not speak. She could not walk. She could shuffle. She also, he wrote a report, and the last part of it was he wrote she had wet herself. And they kept her in the Hubner building for a long time. They diagnosed her with multiple sclerosis. They would say multiple sclerosis, physical. They were describing a physical disability of the brain. I can't remember the word they used. So they knew that her brain was sick, and they knew that it wasn't something like schizophrenia or something like that. They knew it was a physical illness, but they did not have any way to monitor that, to look at that. They didn't have the machines. So there was a lot of speculation going on, and it's quite true that many people were misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis who actually have this disease and similar diseases. And while I'm talking about it, the disease is now called ALSP, adult onset leukoencephalopathy with axonal spheroids and pigmented glia. So it's quite a long name, and that the name is actually a description of the disease. Basically, Helen's brain, we have in our brains gray matter. Everybody knows about gray matter, and we have white matter. It's a white matter disease. That's what leukoencephalopathy means, disease of the white matter. And there's lots of various, they're categorized under leukodystrophy. There's lots of different ones. And she had a very specific leukodystrophy, but they had no way of knowing that then. Now they can do a genetic test and they can find the gene. You ready to go on with that? So your mom was there all that time. She had a few visitors, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Mom's older sister, her name was Nan. We called her Aunt Nan, and she was exactly 20 years older than our mother. And Nan was born in 1893, and our mother was born in 1913. So she would go see our mother, Aunt Nan. And to my knowledge, well, no, I had recently discovered that my dad's brother went to see her once. And then, so that first year that Mom was there, I have to tell this story because it is so important to me and discovering one of the people that loved my mother. And so on that December the 24th, Christmas Eve, our mom was all alone, of course, and a gentleman showed up to see her. And here was her cousin, Hillard Shupp. Imagine that. Of all, he showed up there to see our mother when she was all alone. So there was a Roscoe Stevens that went with Aunt Nan. So far as I know, that's the only visitor she ever had.
Yeah, in the hospital records, one doctor wrote, visitors are rare. I think he said coming once a month for the past 3 months, but that was just at the beginning. Hillard Shupp also was a friend with Sid's dad. Sid's dad's name, his Whitey Starliper. He was a boxer. He was a great boxer, and he was a great soccer player. And Hillard played goalie on Whitey's team. So Whitey wasn't there, but Hillard was there. Now, after your mom died, life just went on, right?
Yeah, it did. We, for whatever reason, we sort of swept our mother under the rug. Please excuse that expression, but we never, as a family, we never talked about our mother. And shame on all of us for allowing that to happen, but we never did. We never talked about her. Occasionally Mother's Day, we'd take a flower to the graveyard, but very, very little. And so I'm ashamed that I didn't connect with my mom all those years after she passed away.
When you say we, there's 7 of you, right?
Yeah, there was 7 of us, and
all 7 of you never talked about your mom?
We never talked about our mother, and I've asked my sisters Betty and Beverly why, and they don't have a good answer for why we we didn't talk about her. She,
Did you ever speculate about why they took her away? What she had, what was wrong, or did you just put it out of your mind?
just put it out of her mind. We did not, or I did not speculate at that time what happened to her.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about her early life. Tell us about her home on the canal.
Well, my mom grew up on the C&O Canal, close to dam number 5, and it was a little community called Two Locks. And it's called Two Locks because they're right down from Mom's house was these 2 locks. That was part of the canal.
You might want to explain what a lock is.
Yeah, the locks are used to raise the canal boats because they're traveling from Georgetown to Cumberland to pick up coal and to bring it back. So in Mom's backyard was those 2 locks, and also the dam was right there. So it was such a beautiful place, and you could walk to the back of her yard and you could look down over the river and over the canal. It was just beautiful. And you could actually, when there were no trees or leaves on the trees, you could actually see the dam. So that's where Mom grew up, and most of her children, or her brothers and sisters, were older when she was born. So that's where Mom's life started, at Two Locks on the C&O Canal.
How old were her sisters, and how old was Bob when she was born? They were in their 20s, right?
Yeah, well, and then when Mom was born, her oldest sister was 22. That was Devona. And then I spoke about Aunt Nan. She was 20, and her brother Robert was born in 1896. And then right after that, there was twins, Aunt Esther and Uncle Earl, and they were born in 1898. And when you see the difference in it, where you can tell the difference, Mom was born in 1913, so there was quite an age gap between her brothers and sisters when she was born.
In fact, one of her best friend, Thelma, was her sister's daughter, and they were the same age. Thelma was her niece, but she was older than her aunt. That's correct, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
And the house, I've been there. When you went out the backyard, they had a beautiful fence all around, and everything was really well taken care of. But you went through the back gate, you walk a few feet, and then there's this big drop down to the towpath, which is where the donkeys, as we say in Philly, used to pull the boats. The boats were out in the water, and they were connected to the donkeys by rope. So she could sit at the edge on these big rocks, and she could watch the canal boats go by. She could have a picnic with her niece who was older than her, and it seemed like a really nice life. And then she met a guy named Whitey Starliper. You want to talk at all about Whitey?
Yeah, it's my daddy, Whitey, the boxer, first met my mother when she was 15, and somehow they went out for a date one time when Mom was only 15 years old. But then when Mom was, I think when she turned 21, my dad came back and started romancing and dating her, and so in 1937, which Mom would have been 24, they got married and started a family, and that's how it all started in the beginning.
Talk about how they had the tavern.
Yeah, let me back up just a little bit.
Okay.
If I could. When mom started school in 1919. And she loved being around children her own age. And when she went to school, which was at the Sunnyside School that we talked about, she met a girl by the name of Helen Seibert. And it turned out Helen Seibert was my mom's best friend and probably the first person that I discovered that loved her. And it was just wonderful. And the story goes on and on, but about that relationship with Helen, but it was wonderful, and they went to school together, and it's quite nice.
But Helen Seibert and her husband rented the tavern to Whitey and
Yeah,
Helen.
that just it's. Hopefully, I'll be able to keep this straight. Helen Seibert, Mom's best friend at school, she got married when she was 18, and she married a gentleman by the name of Jess Hall, and Jess and Helen moved to Clear Spring. And then so Jess was the barber for Clear Spring, and he actually cut our hair. We were little boys. Jess Hall, Helen's husband, cut our hair. And they also had 4 properties downtown Clear Spring, and one of which was a restaurant. And in the summer of 1939, in fact, it was April, my mom and dad moved in to the old restaurant, which was, again, located in Clear Spring, which was owned by Jess and Helen. And I'm sure it was so nice for my mom to be living in a property that was owned by her best friend. So that was a wonderful start for them to move into that restaurant.
And that was the first time they ever had their own place, and also the last time they ever had their own place. I think it's important to note that Whitey liked to drink. Whitey drank a lot of beer. He played soccer. He boxed. He was a good boxer. He was a light middleweight champion of the county for a while. He drank a lot of beer, and they lost the tavern after about a year, right?
Yes. It's actually from April to January.
So they only had that nice, they had all their own furniture. They had did they have 2 children or 3 at that time?
Well, it was 2, and Mom was pregnant.
And by the way, Helen kept having babies, one right after another. And then what happened when they lost the tavern?
This is a very important story for me, and I'm not sure I can sell it. Hopefully I can. They moved in that restaurant in the 1st of April. On the 12th of April, after they had set up their house, moved Mom's furniture in there, and so things were going very well. You know, my mom was in love. She had a husband. She had 2 children. She had a home of her own. Even though she didn't own it, it was her first time, only time, that she was by herself with her family. And so anyhow, on the 12th, just 11 days after they moved in there, a family member died. And her name was Meta King. Meta King was a Sterling, and the reason I'm telling that is because Meta King passed away, and the funeral was at the church where I grew up and where my mother went to church. Anyhow, just think about this for a minute. That day, that morning, my dad's father dropped her mother off at the restaurant. So it was a show and tell day for Mom.
It was your mom and her mom.
Yes, it was her mom and her mother Annie, and they. So Annie was there. Got to see the new home. Got to see the two little babies, and then that afternoon. Just remember now, they're living next door to Helen Seibert, which was Mom's best friend. So what they did that afternoon, there was a funeral of Meta King's funeral at the church. So what Mom and her mother did, she walked the two children up to Grandma Lethy's home where we lived. And then, so Grandma Lethy was babysitting Mom's two little babies. And then Mom and her mother went back down to the church. And they spent not spent that afternoon, but that funeral was 3 o'clock that afternoon. So it was a wonderful day. Just a wonderful day for our mother. Probably the best day of her life.
But then they lost the tavern. They had to move up the street. It was right up the street. I mean, like where the school is practically, right?
Yeah.
And moved in with Whitey's family. Lethy, the grandmother, well, Whitey's mother, brother Buck, who lived there. Who else lived there? Probably 2 sisters at the time.
Yeah, Aunt Leo, Aunt Nellie, they were both there.
And for years, she lived there in one room with all those kids. The daughters slept with the grandparents until the grandfather died. Sid, what year were you born?
I was born in 43.
You slept in a bed with 2 brothers.
Yes.
Who were the brothers?
My brother Bob and brother Dave. And
Yeah.
so our bed was right next to our mom and dad's.
In the same room.
In the same. Yeah, and it was only like 12 inches apart. I could reach out and touch my mother's arm. That's how close we were in that bedroom.
Which brings us to a very interesting story. Sid really only has one memory of his mother. You want to tell it?
Yeah. My only memory.
You want me to tell it?
I'll do my best. The only memory I have, and I'll tell you why. And I don't think Jack put all of that in the book, thank goodness. But anyhow, again, I slept right next to Mom, and Dave was on that side, and Bob was over next to the window. So anyhow, I had a little bit of a problem during those days when I was 5 years old. I would wet the bed. As a result of that, I would try to stay awake. So I could go to the bathroom, but sometimes I would fail. So anyhow, I would be awake a lot of times when my dad came home. So anyhow, he got in bed, and I'm sure my mom was asleep, not that I know for sure. But anyhow, what I remember from that point on, she started to cry. So, I mean, you could use your imagination or whatever. Patsy was born, our baby sister was born 9 months later. So sadly, I was awake when my dad, woke her up and made her cry.
The fact is, Whitey came home late every night because he was out in the bar. So he would come home from the bar and, he'd wake Helen up. And that's Sid's only memory. Now I want to talk about Patsy's birth. Patsy was the last one born. She was the seventh. It's very strange. Helen was already sick at this time. She wasn't quite in her right mind, for sure. The oldest brother was Sonny. They sent him out. She sent him out to get sanitary napkins. She was due to have a baby in 8 months. She had all the babies at home. With I think Lethe probably was she was a midwife. She had all her babies at home, and they wanted to put her into the hospital because she was having all these troubles walking, troubles talking, she was tired and exhausted. She sent Sonny out, she's 8 months pregnant, she sent him out for sanitary napkins. Lethe noticed this. She just put them aside, Lethe was confused why she did that. And then that night, silently, without waking anybody up, with 3 kids, boys, sleeping in the room, Lethe next door, Whitey sleeping, she had a baby. Didn't make a sound. He woke up in the morning and found Helen with a baby, with Patsy, who was the 7th one and who was the only one who would share her mother's disease and fate. Let's move on to Bob Evans. All right. So Sid had a whole life, 50 years, children, built houses. And then one day he went to a Bob Evans in, where the heck was it, Frederick?
Yes.
And what happened?
Well, let me back up just a little bit. I retired in 2015, December. So that winter, that spring, I was had plenty of extra time. So that's 2016. But anyhow, on March the 16th, that was March the 16th. I went out for breakfast, and my favorite breakfast was pancakes and sausage gravy, so I would get that at Bob Evans. So I go to Bob Evans for my favorite breakfast, and it was a good day, a good morning. There was a couple sitting beside me, across from me, and they were probably my age, and had this lady with them, and I assumed it was her mother. But anyhow, I kept thinking about
the school,
talking to him. But then the traffic was stopped out front, and I can't explain what happened. Is right in front of the restaurant, a school bus stopped, and it stayed there and stayed there. And I'm wondering to myself, out of nowhere, I wonder if my mother rode a school bus. And that's how it started, and I went over and introduced myself to the couple, and I asked the lady, the mother, if how she went to school. And she said, I apologize for interrupting. And then she said, I'll tell you how I went to school. She said, I either walked or I rode the family horse. And so she said, when I rode the horse, she would turn the horse loose, and the horse would walk back home by himself. So it was an incredible day. And I remember texting Holly, when did they make the first school bus? When did my mother ride a bus? It was incredible. It was just wonderful day.
How old was that lady?
98. She was 98 years old.
And how old would your mother have been at that
103.
Okay. So then you got really interested in finding out what happened to your mother. Can you tell us about when you went to the old house that Easter?
Yes. that was quite a day for me, because I was off to the races. I wanted to know everything about my mother, everything. I didn't know anything. What little bit I did know was bad. So I wanted to find the good stuff. So I went and visited with Holly shortly after that. When I met the couple at the restaurant, so Holly and her family were on the internet looking for Mom's house. I knew where it was at, but we were looking for pictures. So anyhow, that was just the day before Easter. Easter morning, I get up, and I was possessed. I couldn't wait. I could not wait. My older sister had invited me for Easter dinner. I was to be there at 12. So anyhow, I got up and I got dressed and went to church. And after that, and I made a beeline down to that house. And I parked my car, and the weeds were growing, the thistles were growing, the flowers were growing. It was a good day.
This is the house on the canal. He's talking about the house on the canal where his mom grew up. It's now been abandoned since 1979.
Yeah, and that's right. So anyhow, I make my way up to the front door. And it's weeds everywhere. Anyhow, so when I get to the front door, I step in the front door, I look, and there's no floor. There's no floor. All I could see was down into the cellar below. But the steps were hanging there. The steps up to the second floor are there. And they're supported on one side. The other side's just hanging. So I was determined. I let good judgment. I did not use good judgment. I let my passion overpower my good judgment. So what I did, I jumped. I jumped from the front door to the steps. And the steps didn't fall. Somehow they held me. It was just Tuesday. But it was nobody in their right mind would have done that. But I did, and perhaps I wasn't in my right mind at that point. So anyhow, I just had to get upstairs. And there was some floors upstairs.
So you went up the steps.
I went up the steps. I made my way up the steps. And, it's just like sitting here. I'm looking. There's no roof. There's nothing up there. But here I am standing. So there was 3 bedrooms. And it was easy for me to put one foot from the other one into the other. So there was 3 bedrooms. So I knew I was late for dinner, Easter dinner. And
Called your sister.
I called my sister, Beverly, and I said, Beverly, you'll never guess where I'm at. Where are you? And why aren't you here? So I told her, and I said, I'm in your mother's bedroom at the old house. No, you're not. I said, Beverly, I am. I'm at her house. I'm standing upstairs in your mother's bedroom. You don't know which bedroom she slept in. And I said, no, I don't. But I said, I've been in all 3 of them. So it was just wonderful. So then I told Beverly, I said, Beverly, I'm going to leave. But before I left, and I told myself, and this is so important, that was probably up to that point, that was the closest I'd ever been to my mother. And I told myself, when I looked up to the sky and could see the clouds, and I'm thinking, I want to live forever. But if I'm going to die, this is a good place for me to die. So anyhow, after all of that moment, and it was just precious. I was close to my mom, so close. So I made my way back down the steps, and the steps held me. They didn't fall, and I was able to jump out to the front door, and I actually met Holly on the road on the way back to Beverly's house.
And you went back there many, many times after that. In fact, you found something. Can I get that thing you found?
Sure.
All right. Where should I put this?
Yeah, just put it there.
Ah. All right. Go ahead, Sid.
So anyhow, what a beginning. What a start for me. So my sister Betty, who lived nearby, and I went to see her, and I told Betty the story. And I said, Betty, will you go back down to the old house with me? She said, of course I'll go with you. So we went back down. Not that day, another day, but anyhow. We parked our car out front, and again, it's weeds and everything. But anyhow, when I walked by the cellar door, this handle was sticking up out of the ground. Just that little piece. Of course, this was not a part of it. But what I found was my mother's father's ice cream maker. It was, oh my, I couldn't believe it that I found that. Of course, it didn't work. It was all rusty, and boy, that was my first treasure. It belonged to my mom's dad. And then we also, go ahead, Ty. Okay. But anyhow, my sister saw yellow flowers. I thought they called daffodils. I think that's what they were called. So we're digging up daffodils for my sister. And so it was just a wonderful day, and Betty was so supportive, and we took the things home, and it was just wonderful. We had something that belonged to our mother.
And you tried to fix it.
Yes, I did. I've tried to fix it so many times, and to get the right pieces. I was never able to get the right pieces, but I'm pretty close. It does turn, but it doesn't turn very well.
And what do we have here?
Yeah, well, this my sister Betty, and I wish she was here. She has 6 or 8 treasures in her basement, and she keeps them under lock and key. But what we have here, and these are Betty's. Betty had, and our mother's sister, Aunt Esther, gave these shoes to Betty. So we suspected they're from 1915, and Mom would have worn those to church or to Sunday school. Mom was born in 1913, so Mom was probably 2 years old when she wore those shoes. And so it was so important to get those and bring those along today to show you.
So they're 100 years old.
Yes, they are. They're 100 years old.
And we have one more item. So you went looking for the school, and you knocked on some guy's door.
Yeah, we got directions from a family member where the school was located.
Helen School.
Helen School. And it was called Sunnyside School. And it was only about if you could walk directly to the school, it was like 3/4 of a mile. And so anyhow, we went down there, and sure enough, the directions were perfect, and we found the Sunnyside School. It had been remodeled somewhat, but we could tell. So Betty's not as brave as I am. So I see the neighbor's house, and I said, Betty, let's go up and knock on the neighbor's door. No, Sid, don't do it. Don't do that. I parked the car, and Betty got out with me. We went up and knocked on the door, and knocked a couple times. And finally, this gentleman come out, and I said hi, and I said, I was wondering if you could give me some directions or help me. And he said, of course I will. I can help you. So I said, we're looking for the Sunnyside School. and he pointed towards the van, right? I mean, not the van, but right beside his house is the Sunnyside School. So we became the best of friends. I just loved Bernie. He, like I said earlier, he shared my passion for that school. He loved my mother's school. He loved it because his parents lived there. And so anyhow, he talked about the bridge that my mother used to walk to school. She had to cross a stream. So he would tell me where that bridge was at. Everything, where the cold bin was, everything. It was just incredible. So Bernie became sick. He became very sick, and his wife called me. So my other daughter, Beth, and I went up to see him, and he was on the bed in the living room and had oxygen hooked up, and we talked, and I knew he had this from the school. This is what Bernie described as the paddle. So I guess if a kid was bad, you would get the paddle. So anyhow,
How did he get the paddle? How did Bernie get the paddle?
well, see, his parents, when they restored the school, they tore out the first floor. Underneath the floor was this paddle, and they gave it to Bernie. So Bernie took it home, right? So it was just wonderful. But anyhow, here's the tragic part. Beth and I went up there, and Bernie's dying. And he said, "Sid, I want you to have something." And bless his heart, he told his wife to go get I didn't know what it was. He said, "Go get my present." So his wife came back and handed it to Bernie. Of course, Bernie's laying on the bed. And he said, "Sid, I want you to have this." And oh my, what a wonderful moment, that Bernie, my good friend, before he died, gave me his paddle.
And well, let me read what the paddle says. Found by B.W. Henson Jr., 1962, Sunnyside Schoolhouse, ball bat or paddle, Big Spring, Maryland, home place. And what was the last thing he told you? Something about the book?
Oh, yes. Oh, my God, I forgot that. Bernie knew, and Bernie's wife both knew about my project with having Jack write the book. And, of course, that's why I was getting all this information about the school. And then, so when he gave me the paddle, he said, "Sid, would you do me one favor?" And I said, "Of course, I'll do anything for you. Anything. Make sure my wife gets a copy of the book."
And she did. I'm going to just talk about Patsy very briefly. She was the youngest, and she was living her life. She was married to a guy named Mike McKee, really good guy, who I became very fond of. One day, two people noticed that she was dragging her leg when she walked. It was the exact same thing that Helen was doing at the beginning of her sickness. And it kept getting worse, and it went on, and there came a time when Patsy could not talk, Patsy could not eat, Patsy could not walk. Mike kept her home, they fed her, there's pictures of them feeding her. She saw doctors. She had a brain biopsy. She had many MRIs. The best doctors at Hopkins still couldn't quite diagnose what it was, but eventually a Dr. Naidu said it was this disease, ASLP, ALSP. And after Patsy died in 2006, after a very long ordeal, they discovered the gene that causes that illness. Sid has recently met a family where they're all dying from that disease. If you have that gene, there's a 50% chance, if you're born with that gene, that you will die. I found these people online and introduced them to Sid. This woman's 2 sisters died of it. Her mother died of it. Her mother's brother died of it, all in a very short period of time. And it can take 5 years to kill you, and it can manifest itself in various different ways. Sid's mom got it when she was 37. It's possible that her living conditions brought it on early. Her relationship with her husband, it's possible. Patsy had breast cancer, and her problems started shortly after the breast cancer treatment, so perhaps that, but no one knows for sure. But something down in the DNA in her 5th chromosome with a specific name is messed up, and it caused all this misery. No one knows where it comes from. It probably comes down through the families. Sid's family apparently was lucky that only Patsy and Helen got it, that all the brothers didn't get it. And the story of Patsy is really moving. The way Mike took care of her is amazing, but we don't have time for all that. I'm just going to ask Sid 2 more questions. So what was the nicest thing you learned about your mother during all that searching?
That's a wonderful question, and it's an easy question for me, because Holly and Jill's mother, a couple of years ago, said, "Sid, you need to start to focus on the positive. There's enough negative in here to go around. You know, all the people dying and whatnot. Focus on the positive." So Jack's question is a very important question. So my answer to that question was discovering the people that loved her. And it's just so wonderful to do that, discovering. Remember I told you about Helen Seibert, and I have to just give me that picture. When I talked, I have to back up a little bit. When Mom, remember I talked about her going to school, and in 2019. So anyhow, when she and Helen Seibert would go to school, they would go down by the cellar door, not down, and they would pull off a flower. And when they would put that flower, and Mom's sisters did too, they would pull that flower off and put it in their hanky. And then they would squeeze it and put it in their pocket. So that was such a wonderful thing. Another wonderful thing, that was a sweet shrub. And my mom used that for perfume, for doing when she was going to kindergarten. So I have, I'm sure I have enough copies of this, and I have this at home. I planted this at my house. And so anyhow, this was such a big part, not a big part, but a small part of my mother's life. And the sweet shrub sort of symbolizes, is that the right word? My mother's life. So anyhow.
And the thing is, Sid found the sweet shrub at the old house, and he decided to take a piece. It was 8 feet long, and it was sticking out his back window as he drove away with it. Trying to sneak away with it. One day I was in the museum, and I get a text from Sid, and it said, "It's a sad, sad day for me." And he said, "They tore my mother's house down." And we'll just end with Sid's story about the sort of mystical thing that happened to him that day when he discovered that the house was gone.
Yeah, that was such a powerful, moving experience, and I'm not sure how many people get to experience what I did, but hopefully everybody before they move on would get to have something like that happen. So anyhow, my brother's son contacted me that they had tore the old house down. So, so I'm going up there. I knew what to expect. When I got there, I parked my car, and I immediately saw that they had tore the house down. So I just stood there and just everything was nice and neat. It wasn't all sloppy. They had planted grass, and so I started crying, and so anyhow I walked over to the front door. Of course, the front door is gone. I stepped across into that had dirt filled in and had planted grass. So I walked across the parlor where the parlor would have been. And I'm just crying and crying and crying. It's just so heartbreaking to see my mother's house gone. So I get back towards where the kitchen was, so I stepped from the parlor into the kitchen. And this is so true. This is so true. You can't make up this kind of stuff. I step into the kitchen, and I'm by myself, and I hear 2 words. It's okay. It's okay. And it was repeated probably 6 times. It's okay. It was, I mean, I was sort of in shock. I kept looking. It's okay. And I stopped crying. And I think Jack wrote in the book that it was like turning a switch off from or turning a light on in a dark room. And that's what it was. So I hope everybody gets to share an experience like that. So now you have to speculate. Was that God? Was it an angel? Was it my mother? And I'm going to choose the last one because I think my mother said to me, it's okay.
Good job. Okay, we're done, Sid. All right, thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be back, not me and Sid, in 2 weeks with a talk about the mining scene in Sykesville with a man named Johnny Johnson who knows all about the mining scene, but also the people who lived here back in 1790 and 1800 and how they didn't like each other and fought each other, and about the ruins that exist out in the woods that you can go see. But for now, In Search of Helen from Two Locks. Thanks, Sid. Thank you.
Yeah, Jack, there's enough for these.
Oh, and if you want a sweet shrub, come and get one. They're 8 feet tall.